not as dramatic in New Hampshire, but is a terrible problem around the country, the suppression of the vote. So, America is unique among mature democracies in handing over the process of registering and enabling people to vote to essentially partisan machines. Now, that doesn't mean everywhere they behave in a partisan manner. Indeed, I think many places, Iowa and New Hampshire in particular, the operations are very respectful of the principles of neutrality. But in some places, they don't tend to function like that. And so you see the vote suppressed in really outrageous ways. So in Georgia, which was the most extreme example, I think, in 2018, you saw the Secretary of State who, oh, by the way, was running for governor himself, who changed the system for voting booths all across the state to make it harder for Democrats who also happen to be black to vote than for Republicans. And I just wonder what you think we can do as a nation to deliver on what should be an obvious first principle of a democracy, that we all have an equal freedom to vote, and that ought to be guaranteed regardless of your party or regardless of the color of your skin.
Yeah, so one thing I'm for is making Election Day a national holiday. I mean, that would free up people's ability to vote, at least on the day of, and make it so that people don't have to choose between a shift of work or their paycheck or a day's wages necessarily and showing up at the ballot box. Now, you're right that a lot of this does rest in the hands of individual states and secretaries of states. So I would love to try and do things that you can do at a national level. So some of the things I'm for, this actually gets mixed reviews. I'd love to hear what you think. But I'm for lowering the voting age to 16. Because if you can get someone to vote younger, then it actually ends up establishing a lifelong pattern of voting very, very quickly and early. And it would also transform our high schools into hotbeds of actual democracy. Instead of having hypothetical votes, you could be like, look, if you're a junior or senior in high school, you're actually going to be able to vote. Get them in the habit early, and it would also help represent the interests of young people in our democracy because they're going to be on this planet longer. So it's like it makes sense to me that they'd have a say in what we do. So there are things that we can do on a federal level that help just enhance the accessibility of voting. If there's a way we can help undo some of these voter suppression efforts that are going on in Georgia, then I'd be thrilled to do so. But I get the sense that at least in some cases, they are in the hands of the individual state parties.
And automatic vote registration?
Yes, automatic voting registration, I'd be all for that. We should make it as easy to vote as possible. Our turnout rates are quite low in the scheme of things internationally. And you're right that part of that is deliberate. Part of that is that people just want to make it a little bit harder for certain types of people to vote, which means, in my opinion, then that they must know that something is going on. Like if you're practicing democracy effectively, you should not fear the voters.
Yeah, so then what about an incentive solution here? So imagine the federal government said, we send money to every state, but we'll discount it by the proportion of people who don't vote, or who aren't registered to vote. So if only 80% of the eligible voters were registered to vote in your state, we'll cut the amount we're going to give your state by 20%, or take 20% off.
Yeah, I love incentives. It's like a race to the top for registering voters. I love putting resources to work in that way.
Okay. All right, so here's an issue that we might find a little bit of disagreement about, or two. First of all, I'm sure many of you have, because many of you are supporters of Andrew Yang, but if you have not, you should go to his webpage, because he is the candidate who has articulated more policy positions and his position on more policies than any other candidate. I tried to do a comparison, but I can't even remember, I couldn't even count because I'm a lawyer. I can't count that high. But how many of them are there? Because there are like 6 pages here in my notes of these policies.
I think right now we're at 86.
86, okay. So among those policies, many of which are really powerful and interesting, there's one that stuck out for those who think about reform. You said that what you're interested in doing is returning us to a system of earmarks in Congress. Now, earmarks are the ability of members of Congress to basically say this money should be spent this way in my district and this money should be spent that way in our district. And what's striking about that is that 10 years ago, there was a big fight to get rid of earmarks. This was one of Barack Obama's signature reforms. And even the Tea Party joined with Obama to say, yeah, we should get rid of earmarks. But you want to bring earmarks back.
Yes.
So explain to us exactly how this is not enhancing corruption, or what exactly you think earmarks would give us that Barack Obama didn't think they would.
So if you're in Congress, right now, I think Congress's national approval rating is approximately 12% or something along those lines. Like no one likes the job that they're doing. And if you're an individual congressperson, back in the day when the majority leader came in and was like, hey, we're going to try and pass this bill, they'd look at it and be like, I'd be more receptive to this bill if this museum in my district got, money for renovation. And so then they had this like horse trading that went on, and then it made it more possible to do good things, or just get work done in Congress. But now because of the incentives that are set up, if I go in and I essentially just kneecap every legislation and say I'm going to stand on principle, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that, then there's no room for negotiation. Your incentives aren't there to actually be a team player with your party. Whereas in the day, the incentive to be a team player was, frankly, your district would get some goodies. Now you can look at those goodies and say those goodies are a waste of taxpayer money. Or you can look at the goodies and say apparently the goodies were necessary to have a higher functioning legislature, and every once in a while the goodies that people brought back to their district might actually have been a good thing. And so I've taken the latter stance, where if you look at our seized up democracy or legislature, you have to look at it and say, why can you not get anything done? Why do only 12% of Americans approve of you? And part of that is that they can't negotiate with each other anymore, because if the person who's sponsoring the legislation wants to get you on board, they can't offer you any goodies anymore. So it turns out I'm a fan of goodies. And it's one of those things where it's like a cost of this much to enable like this much of potential benefit.
Okay, so the standard skepticism about that among reformers goes something like this. Yeah, that's a happy story about goodies, because it's about leadership handing out goodies in order to get laws passed in Congress. But there's another way goodies might be handed out. For example, you might say, geez, if we could get a bunch of money from the board of directors of this university, we might find a earmark could go to support research in that university. So the charge about earmarks was that they were a kind of corruption. They were a kind of way in which members of Congress could shake down private people or interests or businesses that wanted these goodies so that they would channel money into the campaign. So is that not a problem, or is that a problem you're going to solve in other ways too?
Yeah, so certainly you don't want to open the door to blatant corruption or influence peddling along those lines. But I think that there's a way to bring back earmarks while also putting guardrails up to say, look, you can't be trading campaign contributions for access to goodies, or you can't be personally enriching yourself or people that you know. But to me, those are two separate issues. And that you can hopefully have intelligent guidelines to keep it from getting out of control the way it has at least some proportion of the time been in the past.
Okay, let's try that again. Let's say there are two related issues, because let's take the first issue we're talking about. If you had a non-corrupt way of raising money...
Yeah, it's true.
Okay. You can finish the sentence then, right?
Yeah, so if you have a non-corrupt way of raising money, then I don't need to bring you the goodies in order to get money back, because as long as I represent my constituents ably, then they'll give me the money. And then whether the university is trying to do some kind of back scratching, it doesn't actually affect me.
Yeah. So this is, I think, a really important insight. I don't think any other politician is defending earmarks. But I think they're defensible as long as you also make at the very top of your list of what you're talking about doing, fixing the corrupt way that we fund campaigns. Then I think they could be defensible. Okay, so that's one where we don't have to have a disagreement